Alright, greetings. What's going on, everyone? This is Chris Dixon, and I am back with another episode and discussion here on the Tunnel Vision Podcast. Hope all is good and well with everyone. Hope everyone has had a good and safe week. Hope everyone has enjoyed their Friday thus far. I'm getting ready to head in and kick back and relax here shortly. But I first want to build on some things. And today's discussion, I will be building on ancient Gnosticism and going into the Gnostic origins of Christianity. Okay. Gnosticism or Gnostic Christianity is the mystical and esoteric aspect of the religion, so to speak. All of the mainstream religions, in the world have a mystical foundation, to them, so to speak. And for Christianity, Gnosticism is the mystical aspect of the religion, all right? So it's the foundational roots that gave birth to, the actual religion, all right? What separates Gnostic Christianity from later day, mainstream Christianity or Western Christianity is that the mystical aspect deals with the elevation or evolution of the soul, the awakening of the soul, and true spiritual, evolution, pretty much just tapping into your true divine self, composed to the later day religion, is pretty much based around, the status quo, conformity, moralism, and behaving good and, searching for salvation, outside of yourself, Gnostic Christianity is different, and in my perspective of it, is definitely way more empowering than the traditional fundamentalist, aspect of the religion, Gnosticism was one of the first systems of study that I got into very deeply when I began my spiritual journey, back in my early 20s. And, growing up Christian, I had questions, like a lot of people, coming up in church, just wanting to understand, where it all came from, because when you're raised in religion, you're pretty much taught to just believe and have faith. You're not taught to actually know, anything about it, where it came from, how it was established, the dates and the times, things of that nature, which are essential to know, right? But pretty much when you go through, mental indoctrination and religious indoctrination, your ability to think, outside of the box and even think independently and critically is pretty much shut down. So, not having any freedom to explore other systems of thought and spiritual practices in the world, you're pretty much confined to one system, So pretty much kept in a box, right? But as I got older, I started to break out of the box and I started to study, okay? And when I started to go into early Christianity, I would come across Gnosticism. Um, Everywhere I looked, um, the word Gnosticism was right there. Every time I go into, studying the origins of Christianity, the word Gnostic and Gnosticism was right there. Okay, so it's definitely impacted the early Christian church. Um, it's definitely a very ancient philosophical thought, uh, beginning in later day Egypt and then spreading, to other ancient cultures and civilizations. So it's definitely impacted um, the world in a lot of ways, different spiritual systems, um, and things of that nature. And it's definitely a intriguing system because they talk about in Gnosticism a lot of things concerning the origins of creation, what was here before creation, the origins of the soul, how the soul incarnated into a physical body, understanding the deeper mysteries of life, and even the death process, um, how to transition and get the soul back to its cosmic home. Because the Gnostics, they did teach reincarnation as well, you know, um, so they go in on that. They talk about the entities or archetypes that created the physical world. Like they go in on so much material that when it pertains to Christianity, that later day Christianity just does not cover. Okay, and that's why a lot of people, including myself, we've had questions all along, and our questions just never got answered by traditional Christianity or Western Christianity. But when I got into the Gnostic tradition, that's when my questions started to get answered. All right. So it's definitely important to study, especially if you are seeking to understand the historical origins of Christianity, okay, and understand early, some of the earlier Christian ways of thought, so to speak, or the other perspectives within Christianity. Gnosticism is definitely important to study. All right. So what does the word Gnosticism mean, or gnosis, so to speak? The word gnosis is the Greek word for knowledge, and this particular knowledge is pertaining to self-knowledge. Okay. It's not knowledge that you find in a book or anything like that. This is a particular kind of knowledge that pertains to knowing your soul or knowing your true divinity, okay, as a divine being in a physical body. All right. Or as the Gnostics would, put it, understanding that you are a Christ within yourself in a physical body. Okay. You're not this body. Okay. The body is just a temporary jumpsuit that a divine being incarnated into, okay, to have a human experience. Okay, so that's what you are. All right. So that's the gnosis that the Gnostics speak of. And the Gnostics, they didn't look towards external salvation, or what you would call vicarious atonement. Okay. The Gnostics looked up to Yeshua as well, and they had their perspective of Yeshua, and it was definitely different than what the later day church created and formed. Okay, the Gnostic Jesus, or the Gnostic Yeshua, was not necessarily a historical figure, but a symbolic, metaphor, or what we like to call in the occult, as it pertains to, deities and spirits, and things of that nature, archetypes of the subconscious mind. So the Gnostics looked up to him as an energy, or just an archetype, okay, that is a symbolic representation of their true self, which is the soul, okay. So the Gnostics, they understood that the story of a dying, resurrecting Savior did not start with Jesus, okay. They understood that this particular story and narrative, along with the virgin birth aspect of the story as well, to flourish in other ancient cultures and mythologies. So the Gnostics understood that, and they understood the story of Yeshua being just another, retold narrative, okay? But they all understood that these ancient myths were symbolic, and the stories represented the soul's journey, okay, into the physical, okay, and eventually to be resurrected. So they understood that it was all based around alchemy, spiritual transformation. They interpreted all of these things in the story symbolically, including the death and resurrection. Okay. So that's the Gnostic perspective of the Gospels and the figure we know as Jesus. Okay. And this was why the Gnostics were highly despised by the Orthodox Church and the bishops of the Orthodox Church. So that's why when you study the history of Christianity and you start to embrace the Gnostics, you will see that they had a lot of problems with the Orthodox Christians and vice versa. So this was a battle and conflict that went on for centuries. And of course, eventually, the church later on, when Constantine came on the scene, that's when the persecutions of the Gnostics began, and of course the burning of their books. All right. But thankfully, in 1945, 53 surviving texts were found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. Okay, that's where the Gospels or the Gnostic scriptures were found, and they became known as the Nag Hammadi Library. All right. Two young men who was riding a camel in the desert, they came across a cave, and one of them threw, I want to say it was a rock inside of the cave, and it bounced off this glass jar. And they heard it, so out of curiosity, they went into the cave, and they discovered this jar that had manuscripts in them, and they were originally written in Greek, okay, and then later on down the line, they became translated into Coptic. Okay, Coptic was one of the primary languages of Egypt. Okay, and that's the language that they were translated into, after Greek, and then from Coptic on into English. All right. So of course they had to go through tons of translations, and just to get them, in the manner so that we can read them. Okay. But you have the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Truth, and many, many more Gnostic texts, okay, that pretty much shed light on early Christianity. So that's why they are very important, when it comes down to study, to help you understand the early Christian thought, okay? And of course, they were deemed heretical by the Orthodox Church, because they threaten the established doctrine of the Orthodox Church, okay? And that's pretty much what a heresy is. It's pretty much any system of thought that is in opposition to the established norm, okay? And that's pretty much what a heretic is. The Gnostics, they were free thinkers. They were very, of course, very spiritual, and on top of that, they were very intellectual, as it pertained to the Bible and the teachings of Jesus, along with, like I said earlier, understanding the deeper mysteries of life itself, how this world was created, what was here before the creation, the soul, the whole 9 yards. The Gnostics go in very deeply on these things, especially when it comes down to the soul, okay? So that's why it's very important to study, okay? And I've read some of the Gnostic scriptures. I have not read all of them, okay, but I have read some of the common ones, okay? Like Thomas, I read the Gospel of Thomas, the origins of the world, pretty much, which is the true Genesis story, okay? That's actually the aspect of the Genesis story that pretty much talks about what happened before creation itself, okay? In their mythology, it talks about a cosmic mistake taking place with the goddess Sophia and the creation of this lesser cosmic entity who they call the demiurge and the archons, and things of that nature, okay? And I'm getting ready to go into this book that's titled Gnosticism, New Light on the Ancient Tradition of Inner Knowing by Stephen A. Hoellar. Okay, this is an excellent book to get on Gnosticism, and I'm going to build from some highlighted material here shortly. But I just wanted to go in on the introduction of Gnostic Christianity, okay? So it's pretty, intriguing, to study. If you're someone who's transitioning out of a Christian background and you're wanting to know and understand other perspectives within early Christianity, this is what you're going to stumble across. Okay. So let's get into some highlighted material. Okay. I'm not going to be too long, but I do want to build on some good material from this book. So I'm going to go into chapter 2 and read some good highlighted material. All right. So chapter 2 is dealing with the Gnostic worldview. Okay. At the core of Gnosticism is a specific spiritual experience grounded in vision and union that does not lend itself to the language of theology and philosophy, but instead has a close affinity to and express itself through myth. In this context, the term myth does not mean stories that are not true, but rather stories that embody truths of a different order than the dogmas of theology or the theories of philosophy. Myths were held in high regard in the ancient world, though they lost esteem in the 19th and early 20th centuries. They are increasingly being rehabilitated in our day. A minor mythic renaissance took place in the last decades of the 20th century, facilitated largely by Carl Jung, Mircea Eliade, and Joseph Campbell. Their work fostered the widespread understanding that the meanings present in mythologies, ancient and otherwise, could help undo the alienation and rootlessness prevalent in the individual and collective psyches of our culture. Thus today, we are in a much better position than a century ago to appreciate the mythic message of the Gnostics. This chapter presents some of the principal motifs of the Gnostic myths. Sense of necessity. This presentation must be in prose and not in the poetic and imaginative language of the original sources. Some of the appeal and beauty of the myths are lost. All right. So, God and the cosmos. Most religious and philosophical systems recognize in one form or another that the world is imperfect. Where they differ is in what they suggest should be done about it. In many traditions, humanity is made out to be the villain. Mainstream Judeo-Christian thought, for instance, holds that the transgression of the first human pair precipitated a fall, not only of the human race, but of all creation. The flaws and evils of earthly life are considered the consequences of this fall. Some extreme environmentalists espouse a position that seems like a later day secular translation of the doctrine of the fall. Human beings are seen as the despoilers, the original sinners who permanently destroyed a natural paradise. Gnostics, on the other hand, have a perhaps unique and startling view of these matters. They hold that the world is flawed because it was created in a flawed manner. And this is where the Gnostics, they talk about the world being created by a lesser God, so to speak. Okay, so the Gnostics, they talk about, or they teach about two different gods, okay, in the Bible. Okay, you have the true and unknown God, and then you have the God of the Old Testament, who is identical with this particular God or entity that the Gnostics talk about, okay, who they call the demiurge. I'm going to talk about this particular concept here shortly. But the demiurge who they named Yaldabaoth, who is pretty much the same God as Yahweh, he's pretty much the God that created the physical world, okay? But he's not the true unknown God that they talk about. He's a lesser God, okay, that only created the physical and runs the physical, okay? But the true and unknown God is above him. And that realm is where your soul comes from, okay? So the Gnostics teach that your soul is not the creation of the God of the physical, but the creation of the original unknown God, okay, where the goddess Sophia stems from. And I'm going to talk about Sophia here shortly as well. But their creation mythology talks about pretty much a cosmic disaster that took place. And that's how we get what we call humanity. Humanity is the byproduct of this cosmic disaster that took place before creation itself. Okay, so I'm going to go in on that here shortly. All right, but that's why they believe that the world is flawed the way that it is. Okay, not necessarily the fault of human beings, being disobedient in a garden. Okay, so Gnosticism begins with the recognition that earthly life is filled with suffering and impermanence. Life is hard and then you die is an adage that Gnostics agree with, although they might modify and thus offset the first part. All forms of life consume other forms to nourish themselves, thereby visiting pain, fear, and death upon one another. This truth pertains even to herbivorous animals who live by destroying the life of plants. And this is pretty much describing how we live in a place of survival. So that's how the Gnostics understood, the human experience. This is a place of survival. And for the simple fact that we're all in survival mode and we have to engage in the concept of survival, that within itself in the Gnostic view was considered evil. Okay, it's pretty much punishment for the soul. Okay, just for the simple fact that we have to survive. We have to wake up, work, pay bills, pay rent, deal with the mundane issues of society, wars, illnesses, mass shootings, all these different things that we would deem traumatic and evil. This is the result of that cosmic flaw that took place. So this is how the Gnostics viewed their experience for the most part. Some Gnostics were not like that, but most of them all saw the world as, a big flaw, so to speak. Let's see. In addition, so-called natural catastrophes, earthquakes, floods, fires, droughts, volcanic eruptions, plagues, bring suffering and death in their wake. To face these alarming facts squarely is not easy. Most human beings have a strong psychological need to perceive life as in some sense benign and potentially happy. Gnostics, as well as Buddhists, have often been labeled pessimists and world haters because of their willingness to look the dark face of the world in the eye. Yet both of these traditions affirm that there is a way out of suffering and ignorance, and that this way out involves an essential salvic change in consciousness. As long as a person will not raise his or her consciousness beyond the physical world to higher spiritual realities, the soul's enslavement in darkness, whether darkness in the outer physical world or in the world of the mind, continues. So pretty much what that's saying is, if you're not trying to gain this gnosis of your true divinity, and you're pretty much contaminated with, constant worry, stress, and anxiety about, the things that go on in the world, worrying about if your bills are going to get paid, just pretty much worrying about everyday life, and identifying with these things, that is pretty much keeping your soul in a state of ignorance and in a state of suffering. When you pretty much identify with these things that we are engaging with, so to speak. Politics, being deeply emotionally invested in politics and just the overall construct, of this particular society. Because when you're born into this world, you're automatically under mind control, okay? You're given a name, you're given a religion, you're given you get a birth certificate, social security card. You get all of these things just stamped on you, okay? And you're pretty much conforming to a system, okay? You're pretty much a byproduct of a system that is against you and against your spiritual evolution, okay? And the only way out of this is this gnosis that the Gnostics are talking about, okay? Not saying, don't engage with the world, don't have fun, okay? I'm not saying that, enjoy this experience the best that you can, okay? It's just understanding the deeper mysteries of life, and understanding, the human experience in a deeper sense, okay? And understanding your soul's relationship to this place, okay? You have to understand that this world is not, your home, okay? Your soul came from a divine place originally, okay? And that's where you're trying to get your soul back to. And the way that you get it back there is coming into the awareness that is really who you are. That's the only thing that's real about you, is your soul, okay? Of course, you have your spirit that pretty much shadows the soul, but your soul is the true essence of what we call God. And you're trying to get this divine entity back to its cosmic home, okay? And getting it out of what we like to call in the occult, the reincarceration program, or what people would commonly call reincarnation. But you're getting your soul out of the rebirth process, okay? That's the work. It was always seen in the ancient cultures when it came down to life itself. It was life, death, rebirth. You go and you come back, you go and you come back consistently until you come into the realization that this is what you're doing. And that is when you embark on this journey of gnosis, or what we call knowledge of self. All right? So that's the true knowledge that your soul is here to cultivate. Everything else is pretty much secondary to that. All right. Let's see. It is as though the body and the mind were bars of a cage in which the soul or spirit is trapped. When the captive entity exits the cage and flies aloft, it rises to spiritual realms where ultimate meaning and happiness abide. Soaring through these regions, it finally reaches its primordial home, the divine. That's pretty much talking about what I just described. All right. Let's see here. Let's see. Describing Gnostics as pessimists is valid only if one maintains that the physical and personal psychological realms are the only realities. Regrettably, this view underlies much contemporary secular thought in our culture. In contrast to this view, the Gnostics assign a high value to the self-liberating potential of transcendental consciousness. Let's see. The reader may be familiar with Plato's renowned analogy of the cave. Prisoners held in the cave, being unable to see outside, mistake shadows on the wall of the cave to be reality. The light that is the source of the shadows, however, is the true reality. The Gnostics hold that humans have the potential to turn away from the shadows on the wall permanently and commune with reality directly. This is the basis for an important point. The created world, including a major portion of the human mind, is seen as evil by the Gnostic primarily because it distracts consciousness away from knowledge of the divine. Physicality inevitably attracts one to the external. Psychology calls this extroversion, while the turbulence of the personal mind focuses attention on itself. Though this double distraction, the inner self is forgotten. Yet it is this inner self, spirit in Greek is known as pneuma, that is the point of transcendence within the human field of experience, for it alone has a direct link with ultimate divinity. Through the experience of transcendence, what Gnostics regarded as the true original sin, namely alienation and separation of the human from the divine, can be undone. To state that Gnosticism is anti-cosmic, that Gnostics are world haters, is a gross oversimplification. What the Gnostic struggles against is not so much the cosmos as the alienation of consciousness from the ultimate reality underlying the cosmos, which in monotheistic language is called God. Since to the soul, without gnosis, the cosmos appears to be the only reality. It is an obstacle to the Gnostic's true objective, which is the raising of consciousness above all physical and mental substitute realities to the true reality beyond matter and mind. So, as I stated earlier, you engage with this world, you work, you do what you do to make your income, to keep your sustainability and way of living going. you know, but you're not attaching yourself to the human construct. You see what I'm saying? You engage, but you keep your emotions, you know, attached from it. I mean, detached from it, so to speak. You're not making what you experience as a human and the things you do as a human. You're not making these things the true aspects of life. You see what I'm saying? Like, you're not attaching yourself to politics. You know, that if you engage in politics, that's cool. It's just not allowing the attachment to happen. Soon as the attachment happens, that is when you fall into the distraction that the Gnostics talk about. The further you attach yourself to these constructs that's been created, the further away you are from resurrecting your soul, so to speak. So yes, you have to engage, you know, with this construct. You just have to understand the deeper, you know, knowledge of what your soul is here to cultivate. Okay, because technically speaking, you know, the soul does not want to be in a physical body. Okay, that's the whole point that the Gnostics are trying to make. Your soul is not in its divine place, okay, being in a physical body. Okay, it came here to learn a certain amount of knowledge to reawaken, so that it can remember who and what it is, you know, as God. Okay, so that it can climb that ladder, you know, back to its primordial home, you know, upon your transition. Okay, so that's the whole purpose of why the soul comes to earth. It comes here to learn knowledge. Okay, it doesn't care about, you know, this mundane world. It doesn't care about money. It doesn't care about jobs, careers, politics. It don't care about any of these things except knowledge. Okay, the gnosis that the Gnostics are talking about. So if you're on the path of cultivating this, that is the true work, okay, that you are here to do as far as your spiritual evolution goes. All right, so long as you keep the remembrance of your soul and you continue to cultivate this knowledge, this is pretty much you graduating from the incarnation concept. Okay, it's about graduating from this experience. Okay, once and for all. All right, let's see, what was I at? All right, here we go. The ancient Gnostics lived in a largely monotheistic millennium. The Jews and Christians and even the pagan Hermeticists believed in a singular God. Monotheists envisioned God as the creator and usually also as the sustainer, lawgiver, and law enforcer of the universe. Since the Gnostics, rather reasonably it seems, could not believe that an erring pair of human ancestors could have brought about the evils, the innumerable evils and unpleasantries of the world, they were left with only one culprit, the Creator, God Himself. The world did not fail, or the world did not fall. The Gnostics said rather it was imperfect from the start. And this is going into this particular entity that they talk about, known as the demiurge, and the archons in their creation mythology. The proposition that the world was created by an imperfect deity in his own flawed image makes more sense when one understands the Gnostic concept of God, which is more subtle than most. The God of the Gnostics is the ultimate reality, beyond and in a sense quite alien to the created universe. Like the Kabbalists and most esoterists the world over, Gnostics substitute the idea of the emanation of the divine in place of the idea of creation. The transcendent God does not create. The divine essence emanates, comes forth from the unmanifest state into the manifest, making possible further, more specific creation. So that's the particular true God that they talk about, the transcendent God, the unknowable God. All right. And then you have the lesser God up under the transcendent God. All right. Let's see. The original God remains always the first cause, while other entities become the subordinate or secondary causes of creation. All right. And I'm going to upload a picture of this diagram called the Ophite diagram. It's pretty much an ancient cosmology diagram that's pretty much how a lot of the ancient people understood the creation process and understood how, you know, this particular realm came into existence. So it breaks down the different concepts that the Gnostics are talking about, like the realm of the unknowable God, and then under that particular realm you have lesser gods that created the physical, you know, so forth and so forth. So I'm going to upload that diagram so that you all can have a visual representation of what I'm reading. All right. Let's see. To use a homily analogy, a financier or landowner may decide to develop a large piece of land. Most likely, this person will not be directly involved in clearing and preparing the land or in planning and constructing the buildings. Architects, engineers, construction workers, and others will do this work. It is unreasonable to think that the world might not have been created in a similar manner. The Gnostics have always held this view. To elaborate on the analogy, if the landowner becomes less and less involved in the development and the chief architect is inept and his workers slovenly, then in spite of the good intentions of the owner, the final results will be anything but perfect. This particular architect was known in ancient Gnosticism as the demiurge, from the Greek demiurgos, which means half maker, since he made only the form of the world, but did not create the inner life of the world. The inner life came from Sophia, okay, his mother, in the Gnostic mythology. The workmen and future managers that operates pretty much up under him were called archons, coming from the Greek word for petty rulers. It goes without saying that the majority of the deeds and words of the Old Testament God accord with the character of the demiurge. Gnosticism's disdain for Yahweh must be ascribed precisely to this circumstance. Let's see. Let's see. Almost done. Let's talk about the human being for a little bit. Gnosticism holds that human beings are essentially not the product of the material world. The important term in this statement is essentially, for Gnosticism focuses on the essence rather than the physical and mental containers that envelop this essence. And read that one more time. The important term in this statement is essentially, for Gnosticism focuses on the essence rather than the physical and mental containers that develop this essence. It's talking about the soul. Okay? It's talking about the soul that's inside of matter or entrapped in matter, which is your physical body. So the Gnostics are focusing on cultivating the soul, okay? Not so much the physical body and the physical world, so to speak. Though the theory of biological evolution did not exist at the time of the ancient Gnostics, one might guess that unlike their mainstream Christian brethren, they would not have objected to it, for they believe that the human body originates on earth, but the human spirit has come from afar, from the realm of the fullness, where the true Godhead dwells. A human being consists of physical and psychic components which are perishable, as well as a spiritual component, which is a fragment of the divine essence, sometimes called the divine spark. That's the soul as well. They called it the divine spark. Because the Gnostic tradition recognizes this dual nature of the world as well as the human being, it has earned the epithet dualistic. People are generally ignorant of the divine spark residing within them. This ignorance serves the interests of the archons, who act as cosmic slave masters, keeping the light sparks in bondage. Anything that causes us to remain attached to earthly things, including the mental concepts we hold, keeps us in enslavement to these lesser cosmic rulers. And another thing about these particular rulers and the demiurge, these particular concepts are pretty much the human ego. Okay, the human ego itself is this particular demiurge entity and these archon entities. So they pretty much are a part of our own nature, but it's the part of our nature that wants to keep our souls entrapped in matter, okay, constantly. So the conscious mind, the human ego, these are representations of this demiurge concept, because that's pretty much what it is. It's a concept, and it's a concept of the human thought process, okay? So the thoughts that you have that are depressing, thoughts of anxiety, fears, worries, you know what I'm saying, things of that nature, any type of low vibrational emotion and thought, these aspects of your nature is the cause of them. Okay. So a lot of people, that's religious would say the devil, but in Gnosticism, is referred to as the demiurge energy, okay, which is pretty much, human thought itself, okay. So understand that the demiurge and the archons are not these entities that are external, okay, like looking down on you and playing around on your emotions like that. No, these things are internal, okay. You just have to understand that as you read the mythology. When you read the mythology, of course, it's going to paint a picture like it's this external God that's, ruling over, human beings. But in actuality, these are different concepts or constructs of the human mind and human thought process. So this is the part of your thought process that you're trying to transcend. Okay? You're trying to transcend this part of your thought process. All right. Let's see. Anything that causes us to remain attached to earthly things, including the mental concepts we hold, keeps us. Okay. The majority of men and women are like Adam, who was asleep in paradise. Modern esoteric teachers, notably G. Gurdjieff, have capitalized on this Gnostic theme, representing humanity as a throng of sleepwalkers. Awakening from this sleep is the combined result of our desire for liberation and the supernal help extended to us. Let's see. The sleeping human spirit. Gnosticism professes a very distinct and elaborate soteriology, that is, a teaching regarding salvation and saviors. The sleeping human spirit is stirred by the call of the ultimate divine by way of divine men or messengers of light. Such beings have come forth from the true God throughout history. They descend from the highest spiritual realms to call the souls back. They come to restore the human spirit to its original consciousness and lead it back to the divine. So those examples would be Jesus, Buddha, the prophet Mani, and beings, of that nature. The majority of Gnostics have always looked to Jesus as the principal savior figure. What does salvation mean to Gnostics? In many ways, the Gnostic concept of salvation is close to the concept of liberation found in the Hindu and Buddhist traditions. Gnostics look to salvation not from sin, original or other, but from the ignorance of which sin is the consequence. Those who know the divine through gnosis shed all sin, while those without gnosis cannot help but persist in transgressions. Ignorance, which means ignorance of spiritual realities, is dispelled by gnosis. So pretty much what that's saying is, if you're thinking that salvation is external from you and somebody else is responsible for saving you from your internal battles and transgressions, that's what keeps you in ignorance. Okay, and that's why we suffer. We suffer because we think that somebody else is going to save us. Okay, whether they saved us in the past, when it comes down to the crucifixion, or whether somebody is coming back to save us. Bottom line is, salvation is internal, okay? You have to save yourself, okay? You have to make it up in your mind and understand first that you are your own worst enemy, okay? And you have to also understand that you're your own savior as well, okay? And you have to deal with your transgressions directly, okay? Nobody's coming to save you, or any external form of salvation is going to save you. Salvation is internal in Gnostic thought, okay? So that's the ignorance that they're talking about if you're looking for salvation and just pretty much God outside of your own self, Okay, you must look within yourself and understand that the power and the answers lie within you. Okay, that's when you get the gnosis. Okay, the gnosis, or knowledge of self, is what's going to get you on top of your transgressions. All right. Let's see. The Gnostic concept of salvation is subtle. Students of spirituality whose grasp of Gnostic ideas is superficial often misunderstand salvation by gnosis as a totally unmediated individual experience, a sort of do-it-yourself project. This projection into the Gnostic tradition is largely a product of our secular, religiously alienated age and society. Were salvation possible without any outside aid, the vast majority of the human race would have been liberated a long time ago. Let's see. Let's see. Let's see. I think. Let's see. Anything else I want to read? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about individual salvation, and this is pretty much where I'm gonna close it out. Let's see. All right. Gnosticism has always acknowledged that the potential for gnosis, and thus salvation, is inherent in every man and woman, and that salvation is not vicarious and collective, but keyword, individual. Thus, the entire message of mainstream Christian atonement theology is meaningless to the Gnostic. The world was not created perfect. The world was not created perfect. Its present state is not the result of a fall, and the human race did not incur an original sin that is passed on to all men and women. Consequently, there is no need for God's Son to be sacrificed in order to pacify his wrathful Father and thereby save humanity. Notably, the original Greek word for sin is hamartia, which means missing the mark. When used in this sense, the word sinner describes most people. We all miss the mark, and we do so because we are ignorant of things true and divine. As you can see, the Gnostics don't mess around. Let's see. I think I'm gonna close it out here. I've been on here an hour. I'm gonna do a part 2 on this, and part 2 I'm gonna talk about Sophia. Okay, I'm gonna go a little bit more into the goddess Sophia and talk about her importance in Gnosticism and Christianity as a whole. But that's pretty much all I have for this particular discussion. I know I ended up going over an hour, but I got into the zone. So I hope that you all enjoyed it. Like, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Continue to listen to the podcast on Spotify and other major podcast platforms. Okay. Part 2 is going to be the next discussion, where I'm going to talk about Sophia. All right. But ponder on this particular discussion. Of course, get this book. Gnosticism, New Light on the Ancient Tradition of Inner Knowing by Stephen A. Hoellar. All right. So I will talk to you all on the next discussion. Peace.